You're tuned into the Unnecessary Harm podcast, where we drill down on issues of substance use and its cultural impact. Your host, Shane Varco, Executive Director of the Delgado Institute, with over 40 years experience in youth and community work and a passion for building resilience.
Welcome back to the Unnecessary Harm podcast. Good to have you with us. And for those who are joining us for the first time, welcome on board. Hope you enjoy the experience. Today's guest is very special. I want to introduce her to you and her work. Very important. Every Brain Matters is a non-profit community developed by families negatively impacted by industrialised, commercialised and otherwise marijuana. Every Brain Matters is a trusted educational resource driven by science, lived experience and very hard-earned resilience. They provide family recovery resources, including support meetings to help prevent, manage or recover from a loved one's harmful cannabis use. Very important. They advocate to protect communities from the predatory practices of the cannabis industry, which they are very predatory, and stop harmful drug policies. We're on board with that fully. They reject the false narrative, as does the Delgado Institute, that marijuana is a harmless expression of personal freedom. It is not. Based on scientific evidence and personal stories, their position is that marijuana is a dangerous and addictive drug. And like all drugs of abuse, it can and is destroying lives. Every Brain Matters believes the public is being deceived regarding cannabis products and their effects, and we can see that here in Australia as well. Like cannabis use disorder, cannabis-induced psychosis, and of course cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, which is prolific, which has led to obviously a public health crisis we've seen here as well. Aubrey and her team state that no matter how much the drug culture expands, they will keep on keeping on. Good on you, Aubrey. I love it. Because they wholeheartedly know that every brain matters. Hey, Aubrey Adams, welcome to the Unnecessary Harm podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here with you, Shane.
Oh, brilliant. Wonderful. I know it's a bit of an awkward time for you. It's that time of year, but thanks for chiming in. Really excited about today's engagement with you. In 2024, we have the World Resiliency Day platform that we initiated 2 years ago. And this year in June, the whole World Resiliency Week that we initiate, promote, and have, as you're aware of, and you're part of that platform. The central theme this year was based around a white paper that we developed called Resilient Brain, Resilient Life. And that was in part inspired by your work with Every Brain Matters and those bits and pieces. Now, obviously, we've opened it up into a different arena for different purposes. But yeah, and of course, I met you about 5 years ago in, I think it was Arizona. And really appreciated that insight and the platform that you're going. And that was kind of part inspiration. So apologies for a little bit slow at getting you on board and having a conversation with us. But yeah, thanks for joining us again. Really appreciate that. So we're going to dive in. I really want to drill down into some of your experience. And I know it's been quite torrid. You've seen some wonderful successes, but it's not been an easy road for you. So this really outstanding community resource is a product of a long journey. And it started with some very, very real personal issues for you. For the listeners who maybe not be familiar with your journey, if it's okay for you to share that, Aubrey, I'd love you to share with us about what sort of started you into this space. And if that's okay, I'm aware of it, but obviously our listeners won't be. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yes, I can share part of my story. Well, I'm from Pueblo, Colorado, which is ground zero for the marijuana expansion movement. It's a disadvantaged community. There's a lack of education here, more of low social economic class here. And the marijuana industry just came on very hard and fast here, very strong. And I know you've spoken to some of the physicians that work here in our community. My son's behavior started changing, and I didn't know what was going on. He became irrational, paranoid, delusional, and he ended up trying to take his life. After 2 psychiatric hospitalizations, I said, what's going on, son? I just don't understand, how life became so challenging. And he said, well, I was dabbing and I knew it was making me crazy and I was actually trying to quit. And I said, what the heck's a dab? I had no clue. And he said, well, it's really strong marijuana, Mom. It's like crack weed. And so I started researching at that point, and I came to find out that our community here in Pueblo, Colorado, was mass producing these dab products, and I found out there are very strong, high concentrations of THC in the cannabis plant. And I started reading the science about that and how it does lead to delusions and paranoia and psychosis and increases the risk for unaliving oneself. And I became angry at that point, very angry, because the community that I lived in was calling these products medicine and less harmful than other drugs. And they were celebrating the drug, and that was a very, very hard space for me to be in when I was driving my son to psychiatric units and calling the police on him because of his irrational, aggressive behaviors. And so I got connected to experts around the country and then around the world. And I think you and I probably met via email or social media first.
Initially,
Initially before we even met in Arizona.
Correct.
And then I really started learning from the whole network of people that were talking about this issue. And really, quite frankly, I just got more angrier. I mean, I just could not believe that a state would pass policies that promote such a damaging drug when we're in the biggest addiction mental illness crisis of our time in the United States of America. And here my son I was losing him, and we lived in crisis for over 2 years, and I couldn't even find help for him. So I volunteered my family for crisis intervention with our Department of Social Services. They said as a taxpayer in Colorado, I had that right. And we had a case open with them for about 11 months. They brought a therapist into the home to work with the whole family. And I did learn some, but there was a lot of parent shaming. And there was a lot of minimizing his marijuana use. And me being told I'm the one with the problem. And even my son got on that bandwagon and said, "Hey, Mom, you're the only one not using it. It's medicine and it's great, and it was, it was like living in a nightmare."
Yeah, absolutely.
And so here I was trying to provide a healthy environment for my son, keep him on the right path. And I had a whole world around me telling him different. And I found myself in a position that I couldn't compete against that world. And so there was a lot of hard decisions I made throughout that time. And I won't, it's a very long story, but in the meantime, the Department of Social Services discharged us because my son was so out of control and he wasn't improving. And by the grace of God, there was a standoff in front of my house with the police with my son. I had a police officer telling me that I was a terrible mother. And my stepfather showed up going, "Don't you dare speak to my daughter like that. You have no idea what she's trying to do to help her son." And I remember thinking, I just need to walk away because there's nothing I can control here. There's nothing I can do to help this situation. It was escalating. My son is a very handsome young man, very charismatic. So, he had people believing him. And I walked inside my house and I called my good friend up, and she put me in contact with another young man who was in recovery. And I'm talking to him, I'm explaining the situation. He goes, "Oh, I know exactly what you need. You need a dual diagnosis program. This is exactly what I went through. Will your son go?" And he found a facility in California. And I went outside and I handed the phone to my son. I said, "Will you talk to this young man?" And he said, "Yes." And he got off the phone. He goes, "I'll go, Mom. I'll go to this treatment center." And he had already been in a 90-day inpatient treatment prior to this, the year before. But we went to that place in California, and that was the beginning of our true recovery process. They were they understood the effects of marijuana. They educated me about recovery. They didn't shame me. They encouraged me to keep, trying to do the best I could. They encouraged me to get support, which I had never heard before, like just even people in recovery, how they need their positive peer supports. The parents need their positive peer supports. And then by the grace of God, I found a place in Houston, Texas, a parent-driven recovery community. And that's a long story how we got there, but I was able to get him from California to this whole community of recovery. And he achieved over 3 years of sobriety there. And in the meantime, unfortunately, my husband was believing marijuana was medicine too. And he was spiraling down a path of just mental illness. I was coddling him. I was thinking this poor man is so upset watching our son be so sick that I was like, just don't worry about it. I'm going to take care of this. You just keep working so we can keep the lights on and pay the bills. And it ended up, he got hurt at work and tested positive for marijuana. And then it all made sense to me. He unfortunately did not get better and ended up in a psychiatric unit too. He progressed to the point where, oh, thank you. He progressed to the point where I didn't recognize him anymore, and I was scared. And the medical professional said, "We heard you were trying to find a way out. We need you to leave while he's hospitalized for everybody's safety." So I ended up taking my younger son and joining my older son in Houston, Texas. And I really even dove further into the world of recovery. And I became a host mom for youth in recovery. And I finished raising my 2 sons there. My younger son never touched a drug, but he had a lot of trauma, and he was diagnosed with PTSD and depression. And so I put him in a recovery school. It was the first recovery high school in the United States that's located in Houston. So he went there all 4 years. He was drug tested. It was a great way for him to have an avenue to say no to drugs when he was being pressured to use. And so for those 4 years, we just lived and breathed recovery. Everything we did, all the activities we did were with sober communities, going to 12-step meetings. And it, to me, it not only did it help both my sons, but it drastically helped me, to be surrounded by parents that understood what I was going through.
Oh, look, that's harrowing. Aubrey, I know you're not sharing the whole story. Now, I believe if it's okay, your son did it, if you're okay to talk about this, of course. Yes. So I don't want to, and I know you're in recovery. I'm glad you're getting the support because that's vital. And I think the peer support for those who are endeavoring to live with the addiction of another is incredibly important, because the old adage goes, they're a drug user and we're suffering from it. And that's not, it's not sort of a pejorative term. It's a reality that is quite traumatic. And your younger son experienced that vicarious trauma, it's because of that engagement with his older brother. But I'm really glad to hear that. But it's interesting. I think your son, in that process of that journey out of the cannabis-induced psychosis that he was experiencing, he tried to end his life a couple of times. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, all right, we won't go down that further, but that clearly concerns me and anyone listening to this podcast. You have to understand that this, and as you heard from Aubrey about her husband's journey into this space, when you have a culture like Colorado, ground zero for cannabis legalization, when they begin to say that cannabis is not only legal and it's a recreationally available substance, it's medicine. And once you have that narrative in play, and those who don't subscribe to that narrative and then stigmatized, I am absolutely appalled. And there's other words I could engage and other tirade I could go into about these new speech codes that are in play and coercive speech codes that are demanded of those dealing with the substance user. Yet those who are having to survive the substance use of others are stigmatized, marginalized, and even, as you've experienced, accused. And that is just breathtaking. And you know where culture is in free fall when this is in play. And now you've seen that personally, you've lived it personally. We're starting to experience that in this country. And one of the reasons we are talking to you and others is to push back against these emerging narratives, which are chaotic and they are destructive. And we're not even beginning to spelunk the absolute chaos in the public health space. In America, you don't have the free public health care that we do in Australia. We have this black hole called public health. And now we treat every substance-using episode as a mental health issue. It's not a substance use issue, it's mental health. So it has to be treated as mental health. Now, we know they're co-occurring. There's no argument in that space, and sometimes it's a chicken and egg. Mental health, they would argue voraciously that, it's mental health that leads to drug use. No, it's not. It's not. Sometimes it is. Trauma-informed drug use is there, no argument, and that's real. But recreationally informed drug use, that's a huge component. And that's a decision made to break laws, to engage in a self-harming episode for the sake of fun. And somehow that's a mental health issue, and we don't want to challenge the behaviour. So it's a free-for-all. Then we just throw them into our free public health system, and that black hole continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and budgets blow out. But more importantly, outside of that, and I'm a little rant here, but outside of that space, you've got the human cost. Now, your family is still dealing with the human cost of this, and will basically have, to use a very, very pointed language, scars that you'll carry to the day you die because of this regime of recreational cannabis use.
Yeah. They say it's just a plant, but it's a very powerful plant that has a effect on the whole family and society and healthcare costs. And, I can add a little bit more to my story.
Sure.
When I left my husband, we owned 2 homes and we had to sell both of them. And the treatment my son had was it's expensive. And actually, I had probably one of the best programs out there for him. But we lost everything, just everything. I had no equity left. And so that's something we don't talk about. It's cost to society, the cost of healthcare, but like you said, the cost to the families. And I found myself in a position where I lived with friends for a year rent-free. They charged me $150 to live there. They understood the position I was in, and they said, just come live with us, pay off as much of your bills as you can. And thank God they did that for me. So even though there's been a lot of challenges along the way, there's been a lot of blessings towards me. And my son did relapse very hard when he was 19, and we didn't see him for 2 years. And at that point, when that happens, a family needs even more support. So, of course, I had to kind of dig myself out of a dark hole when he said bye. And I had to really dig into my own recovery program. I had to learn how to still take care of myself, even if my son wasn't going to be part of my life. It's like mourning for a child that's still alive.
It's grief. It's grief.
It's just pure grief. And so that was one of my inspirations to start Every Brain Matters. Is I was a parent coordinator. I was running recovery support groups, and the information I was getting in the program I was part of, I'm like, the world doesn't know this information. Like they're hungry for it. And so I started having the recovery support groups and was given the opportunity to develop Every Brain Matters. So, initially I wanted to bring families in to advocate against these policies that are promoting addiction and mental illness. And I found out that these families, they're not ready to advocate because they're living in crisis and they need support. So I developed more of the support arm with Every Brain Matters now. And I never dropped the ball with advocacy. I've jumped through every door that's been open to me and brought families with me as much as I could when they were ready to do that. But that is the emphasis of Every Brain Matters. We are here to support and advocate for families. And fast forward, my son has been in and out of my life. He did show up, and he was very sick. He had the cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome,
yes.
just skin and bones. And I think most people would have looked at him and said, well, he's a meth addict, he's addicted to meth, and I'm like, no, it's THC. And at that point, it took him 5 months to quit testing positive for that drug. That's how strong this drug is. People just don't understand. They call it a soft drug. I have no clue why they call it a soft drug. Because that has not been my experience, especially with these more industrial grade products. But just to kind of give some hope too, so I can encourage families that might be experiencing the same thing. I got out of my husband's way. I left him. We had been together since we were teenagers, and he one day decided he was going to be sober, and that was about 2 years ago.
Okay.
And that wasn't me begging him to be sober. That wasn't me talking to him. Believe me, I did try to talk to him about being sober.
You desperately love someone, you do those things.
You do that, yeah.
The journey. Yeah.
And our relationship started to heal, and we never divorced through this whole process. And I moved in with him last February. I moved back to Colorado, and we bought the same house we raised our children in. And that's where I'm sitting today. I'm sitting in my old office. So I was gone from this house that I adored, and here we are. We're living as roommates, We're not necessarily husband and wife, but we're best friends. He's sober. He's doing good. They've weaned him off all the medication they put him on, and he's starting to smile again and feel better. And so there's the silver lining. There's the blessing in the story.
Yeah. So, look, thank you for that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the advocacy space too. But yeah, the silver lining people take away, and it's important that recovery works. But the tragedy is you have to understand what you've just heard. That journey, basically shared in a matter of 6-7 minutes, is years of grief, listeners, years of grief and angst and frustration and vexation and deep grief. It's profoundly deep grief. I had a brother in a similar boat who actually passed away earlier this year, not because of using weed, but he was 25 years of his life taken away from him because he was using high-end weed for a lot of years. Complete disability in the end. We have what we call a national disability scheme here, which once you've been assessed by that, then the government pays for everything. Housing, medicine, everything is free. It's just free. And so he used drugs, didn't contribute to the economy, become mentally ill, like seriously psychotically mentally ill, and then for the rest of the time has been on that system. And everyone else is paying for this because he engaged in substance use. And that's not to denigrate my brother. He was sober and he was off cannabis and had been off all drugs for a good 3 or 4 years, but his body was so depleted and so ruined by his marijuana use, he couldn't swallow anymore. So he could only use liquids. He only had liquids. And it was a condition that they did name, and I cannot repeat it because it just escapes me right now. But that was part of the outcome. And he was an elite athlete in his early 20s. All gone because I won't go down that road any further. But my concern here is that people have to get this. The recovery is, we can fix it. Harm reduction is a classic mandate that says, well, just deal with it. Just let it all go and we'll fix the problem later. What we just heard there, listeners, is just a snapshot of one life, one family that's gone through hell, literally gone through hell because of this substance. And this is something we don't want to unleash. This is not something we want to permit more. And the permission models that are being inculcated into culture, decriminalization, normalization, trivialization starts with that. It doesn't matter, it's just weed. And then we normalize it. Everyone's doing it. And then we decriminalize because there's no point arresting people for something that's normal. And then we legalize it and then we get the complete uncut, unvarnished chaos that you've experienced. And that has to be understood at the highest levels. And that's why your advocacy is important. I won't stumble over my words. Anyway, look, I think the second question I want to tip into here with you, Aubrey, is on that space about the David and Goliath scenario you've kind of indicated here, because it is a very small David and a very big Goliath. What do the pro-weed activists and the cannabis industry do to savage the brains of those they think don't matter?
Well, they deceive
Tell me about
them.
that journey.
They deceive them. They they tell the voters, they tell the people that we're going to regulate this drug, and they don't regulate it. They have mass produced more harmful products. So the products available through the legal market are more harmful than the products in the old school black market, and they deceive by putting cannabis or THC in deceptive forms that look like normal foods, that you're just popping in a gummy, or you're just sucking on a lollipop, or you're just going to eat one brownie, or you're just going to hit on this vape, and they have to mask the vapes with sugary flavors. They're the greatest deception. This is the greatest deception of our time. These drug dealers know exactly what they're doing. They're in suits. They just put the shiny fronts of the cannabis stores in our neighborhood and act like it's chamomile tea, and it's, just come get your cannabis food, and we're just going to hijack your brain, and we're going to attract the children with these cartoon characters and all these big athletes and rappers that make it look normal. And yeah, it's a huge deception. The drug dealers, the policymakers with this know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they're laughing all the way to the bank while we're out here cleaning up the carnage of what's happening. And part of that is, we did speak about my son trying to take his life, and he's one of many of those kids in Colorado. The number one drug found in completed teen suicides here in Colorado is cannabis. And there's other parents here speaking out about that too. And, I'm lucky my son has survived that, but, he's still not well. And so he's, if he doesn't remain sober, he'll end up on a pathway like your brother. And the last doctor he spoke to said, if you don't stop using marijuana, you're going to be schizophrenic.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, it's interesting. Another piece of research just came out about a week ago on Cambridge Press from their psychological. Can I get this right now? Yeah. But it was they're talking about the fact that of course the long-standing argument has always been that people will end up with cannabis-induced psychosis had a predilection for it or a predisposition for it. But we've known from evidence back even 5-6 years ago that wasn't the case. But this new research has just again reiterated the fact that no, this can happen to anybody, and then particularly for the developing brain, which is what you're championing, and that's what we want to speak to you, have your voice heard very much so in the marketplace, because this is really, and this whole marketing principle about marketing to children, which is an age-old marketing principle anyway. If you want to be in business, this was said 50 years ago, if you want to be in business in 25 years, you've got to market to children. Mm-hmm. Now, the addiction for profit sector is just love that marketing enterprise, and they've also got a product that guarantees custom because it's addictive by its very nature.
Yes.
It is addictive by its very nature. So it's insidious. And it's interesting, a lot of these actors would talk disparaging about alcohol and go after them. We do too, because alcohol is the drug that does the most harm because it's legal, socially acceptable and fully available. And they want to add another psychotropic toxin to that regimen and pretend it's not going to do any harm. It's madness. And so we're seeing a lot of that. But I want to talk about a little bit about, if you can, of course, Aubrey, without crossing any lines in your own personal safety. I know you've had some pretty horrid, violent threats made against you and some pretty nasty attacks against you from the sector that promotes this. Can you talk a little bit to that, or is that something outside the remit today?
Well, I mean, I can't talk about the details. Some of them are just horrible, and I try to make a file of that. I mean, there was a picture they put up on me on Twitter just a few weeks ago, and I just opened it up to post, and I saw the picture of me, and I just couldn't believe, but that they do stuff like that. And it was my face, surrounded by stuff that nobody would want to be surrounded by. Because I just put it that way. And, I used to get kind of angry, and now I'm like, I just feel sorry for them, that the people that they're kind of, not just obsessed with me, but everybody that kind of talks about the education and wants the the public to be well informed about the effects of marijuana, it's just a testament of what the drug does to an individual. It robs them of their humanity.
Correct.
It takes their empathy away, and they become so self-absorbed and so selfish and delusional that they just don't even have the awareness. And I'm not making excuses for them. They need to be held accountable for their behaviors and their abusive nature. But it really is a testament on how dehumanizing marijuana truly is.
That's the word, dehumanizing. And I think one of the things about the proactive face of the bad actors in the culture is they continue to try and paint cannabis as not just harmless, but it's actually beneficial. Yeah. But we know from our personal experience, and you know from your personal experience, and that people that are promoting this psychotropic toxin, and therefore they are promoting the outcomes from its use. Now, not every single person who uses weeds ends up with a mental illness. We know that. We're not here to talk about that space. It's not to get that straw man running. We know that not everyone that uses marijuana is going to be violent and chaotic and vulgar and attack you and all that sort of thing. But we do know that those who are really entrenched in this space and as you've experienced, act in such a manner because the very things you've just said, and I want to reiterate that to our listeners, it does dehumanize you. Dignity is taken because egocentricity is amplified. I need, I want, and at any cost and all cost, I will defend this position. And someone say, oh, that's addiction. It could be, but that's not necessarily the case. To blame addiction, this is just the nature of what this psychotropic toxin does. High-end THC weed, which is 10% and above. That's what the journals are now considering. 10% THC and above. And we've got products, as you know, on the market at 25, 30. You get the dabs and the vapes. We're looking at 90 to 95%. This stuff is insane. Insane. And so these people act in these violent, foul, vulgar ways. And those who promote, permit, and push cannabis, now the promoters are the politicians, and permitters are the politicians, the promoters are the marketers, and the pushers are the local people who just want to get their rocks off. And so you've got this whole system that's actually advocating for the dehumanizing of a community, which goes against every fundamental Western democracy principle, which is staggering. And what concerns us the most, and I've been in meetings, I was presenting to a committee on this in our state a couple of years ago, and the person who organised the committee was a politician from the then Sex Party. It was called the Sex Party. They changed their name to the Reason Party because the Sex Party was losing sex appeal, apparently. But they wanted to legalize, I know, go figure. They wanted to legalise, of course, cannabis, and they had this wonderful presentation, and it was just beautifully done because these same people were involved in the injecting drug using scene. They were overseeing the Injecting Drug Users Association. Most of the policies in Australia now are drug user informed, not prevention informed. They're harm reduction informed, not the demand reduction informed. So we've got this new narrative where this is again trivialised, normalised. Now we're moving into we're going to decriminalise, and we try to legalise, but that was stopped fortunately. So it didn't get legalised, but they're trying again now in another state. And federally, earlier this year, we presented to a national committee. They wanted to legalise it. And the gentleman from a particular party, the Greens party here, very pro-drug use, they got quite angry and aggressive. And my concern here is, and I did say this in one setting, got myself into a bit of trouble. I said it'd be interesting to actually drug test the people on the committee and see what's actually going on. That met with cries of indignation, well.
Please, you need sober people making decisions for you.
Exactly. But the idea that you even accuse them, but I mean, hang on, you're promoting marijuana, you've already declared you use it on a regular basis, and your children use it. So why wouldn't we have you drug tested? But again, the concern I have here is that when you have a society that's lost its context for being a community of caring, supportive, loving people, which we all espouse on paper, and then you introduce these kind of policies that bring and actively permit a wrecking ball like substance use, particularly cannabis use, because of the way it is couched, is just staggering to me. And And the abuse, and I know there's other stories which you won't go into today because I haven't been made aware of them. You've shared a little bit, but also made aware of from other actors, pro actors in our space, some of the pain and some of the abuses you've received, Aubrey. And I am desperately sorry that's happened to you. And on behalf of all decent people, I'm sorry. And it is just outrageous, particularly with someone going through the situation you've gone through. I
can tell you something funny, though, about a couple of things I just want to add. First of all, one of the first threats I got, I went to Maryland, and Dr. Christine Miller had me come testify in front of a Senate committee. And on my way back, I had this YouTube channel where I was speaking out about this. And I was in Colorado. My son was in Houston in recovery. And he was watching my YouTube channel. And this guy was speaking very abusive to me and negative to me. And my son chimed in and he said, "Hey, man, you can't speak to my mom like that. I'm the only one who's allowed to speak to my mom like that." And I guess, my son is so funny. And I just, so there, I try to laugh my way through it. And, this pro-marijuana group, this harm expansion group, they're very entitled, and they preach a lot of, it's my freedom, but yet they do everything they can to suppress my voice.
Correct.
They in Texas alone, like especially the state of Texas, there's supposed to be all this freedom there, right? Well, the marijuana army, I call them army, and it's this coalition called Texas Cannabis Collective.
Wow.
They sent out a dog whistle to all their followers to attack my Facebook page. It's called Citizens for a Safe and Healthy Texas, where I was providing this education, showing up at the Capitol, testifying against these policies that would legalize cannabis. And they said, you go attack her page, rate it really low. I had a video I had made that was going viral. I think I was up to, almost 50,000 views or something. Wow. And they weren't going to let that happen. They had to stop people from seeing that video. And it was a message from Colorado to Texas. Coloradans want you to know this. And so this whole freedom thing is just bizarre to me. Like, okay, so you don't want to have a complete conversation about this. You only want your voices heard in front of the legislators and the voters, so you can keep up the farce narrative. You can keep up the front. So that's, even though there's like attacks to me and other people in the same platform, that's one thing. It really, like, I've really looked at them as victims. So it really, that part doesn't bother me. What bothers me is their oppression.
Yeah.
That's what bothers me, that they think that somebody like me doesn't deserve a voice, or the other families don't deserve a voice. So that's the one thing I don't tolerate.
And that's the very nature of, and this is what's interesting about the drug using space. When a drug user, and again, we've got to be careful about, making blanket statements about every drug user, because there are people out there who they call themselves functional drug users, which is an oxymoron, but they pay their bills and they go to work and they pay their taxes and whatnot. And I still remember one of the major hospital organisations here, private hospital and public hospital organisations here in Victoria, during COVID, they were having a lot of these aging drug users. A lot of them intravenous drug users, but started with cannabis and still use cannabis, were presenting, and they're saying, guys, you've got to stop this behaviour because your health is declining. All drug use ages yourselves, and their health is declining. And the demand they were placing on the system as functional drug users, by the way, is people paying their bills, paying their rent, going to work, blah, blah, blah. But the health costs, because their bodies are just breaking down. Now, beyond that, you've got families that are now neglecting their children. Kin care, what we call kin care in Australia, is when relatives outside of mum and dad are now looking after children because of mum and dad's drug use, starting with cannabis, nearly always. In fact, one of our drug court judges here in New South Wales famously said years ago, I've never met a heroin addict yet who didn't start with alcohol and cannabis. And so it was interesting that he made that statement decades ago. And but we're seeing more and more of this, and the chaos, the social services chaos, the children, the trauma that children are going through. We've just done a paper on this investigative paper on this. The ripple effect on kids is huge. And they're starting to say, this is terrible, and violence against women, terrible, abuse against women is terrible. But we say yes to drug use. So we're arguing, if you're going to say no to violence against women, you can't possibly say no to drug use, because that's just silly. No one can say no to drug use. The insanity behind this is evidence of drug-using behaviour. It is what I call the new reefer madness. It is the new reefer madness. This cognitive dissonance, this vile protection of my self-aggrandizing, self-promoting rights. But the inability to see the harms being done to others is clearly evidence of a serious problem, that this is one small problem this drug's creating. And you're experiencing the back end of this. We haven't received that level of abuse. Obviously, we're an institute, so a little bit more, although we're a not-for-profit sector, we still get gaslit, and we get these ghosted and all sorts of things happen to us. And we're marginalised as, we're extremists. That's just a nice pejorative term. Oh, those extremists.
Your common sense, actually.
Yeah, exactly. But so for me, I'm really that really concerns me. And I was at a conference recently in New South Wales with the pro-drug activists, and we're just running the show. And there's supposed to be a common voice from the people, and it was all drug user-centric policy framing, all of it. There was next to nothing about prevention, nothing about education, because it doesn't work. Apparently, it works with tobacco, and it can work with alcohol, but it can't work with illicit drugs, and certainly won't work with cannabis. So all these again, what we call the new reefer madness is just burgeoning, and the more drug use is used, the more this madness continues to grow. There is a quote, and I want listeners to hear this, because I think it's an interesting quote by a fellow by the name of Rob Bell. He talked about freedom. He said, freedom is not the ability to do whatever you want. Real freedom is the ability to go without what you crave and be okay with that. That's freedom. Now, when you have not got the ability to see an option to step away, you are not free. Yeah. And these people are not free yet, and that's why they demand assiduously, violently demand their right, because they can't be free. And that should be a clear warning sign to any government, any policy-making body. This is not a good practice, guys. This is not good for not just public health, mental health, family dysfunction, but for the very fabric of society. This is chaotic. It's absolutely chaotic.
It absolutely is.
I'm just having a rant here. I do that every now and then.
No, it's great. I mean,
have a little rant.
Please keep going. You're wonderful. Yes. I'm like, my head is shaking up and down because I agree with every word you're saying. Yes.
Well, again, thank you for letting me do that. But our listeners are a little bit used to that from time to time when I get on my little soapbox. But one of the things that, you've talked about that, and I really thank you for doing that. I know it's tough talking into some of those spaces, but I really want to sort of kind of wind up a little bit on this. But it's been really heartening to see from our end. We're watching what's going on in the US, because Canada was another one. Of course, Uruguay had a go, and that's kind of not been scrutinised as much as it should. But there's been a number of states in the ballot box who have pushed back against the recreational legalisation of cannabis, which must be very heartening for you. People are beginning to push back. We've seen that, and in part for the work you're doing and other groups in America that we're connected with, like SAM, and obviously Dr. Ken Finn, who works with the Academy.
International Academy. The Science and Impact on Cannabis.
Cannabis, that's well done. Okay. Thank you, Aubrey. I knew you'd rabbit that off, no problems at all. But Ken's part of our Delgado Institute research think tank, along with Dr. Karen Randall from Colorado. So she's wonderful as a physician, and we've had her on this program as well. But what do you think is been the key? Because obviously the well-funded, as you've indicated so clearly, the well-funded pro-cannabis lobby are just loaded to the back teeth with money, and they just bombard. And what were some of the keys in your mind, besides obviously your great advocacy and the advocacy of others, were some of the factors now we're seeing emerge that seeing pushback, whereas even 3 years ago, the states were kind of ticking over, falling one by one by one. What do you think's happened, changed that narrative in the last 18 months, 2 years?
Honestly, I think because more people are being harmed.
Sadly.
Sadly, yeah. Sadly, I think more people are being harmed. We still don't have the political equity in this space to, make a huge difference. It's very politicized and, like you said, not common sense. It's very an insane space to be in. There's not enough people out there still, really raising awareness. Now, Florida, though, said no to legalizing marijuana. They had a prior history of being harmed by the Delta 8s, the Delta 10s, through the federal Farm Bill of 2018. So they've got a touch of what's coming already. And so there's already a lot of people being harmed there. So they really did Drug-Free America with Amy and Ellen. They all just did great. Yep. And I was on one of their meetings and I could hear the frustration in their voices. There was just a few of them working hard, and not, they really didn't know if they were going to win. And I just said, even if the outcomes are not what you want, the education you're providing is vital. So keep going. Yeah. There needs to be 1,000 more organizations doing what we need to do. There needs to be, 50,000 more people out there doing podcasts and doing all this work that you and I are doing. And then we need billboards across America, across the world, and until, like, to me, I'm not going to give up until either God takes me or there, it's a common sense knowledge that cannabis causes severe psychosis and is very addictive and not medicine. That's where I'm going to keep coming until that's like a household narrative. I'm just going to keep going until people understand that. And even that means, like, if a pro-marijuana podcast invites me on, I'm going to go on because I want the viewers to hear it somewhere. And I don't want them to feel shameful if they're having negative effects and they do need help. I want to encourage them that they're capable of getting better. It's not easy, but they are capable of it. And with these policies, though, like I really think there was such a pushback because there's more people harmed, unfortunately. I think that's what it comes down to. And there's more people educating too.
Yeah. And I think that what you're doing, and specifically, Aubrey, in this context, I love the fact that you've just harnessed awful experience, but you've engaged in that lived experience, that living experience, and you've harnessed the recovery alumni, which I think is really key. It's one of the key factors we believe in, that those who have traversed best practice of abstinence and jumped into this space and have gone through the torridness of it and managed to get out and have now understood that I want to be a voice for prevention. I want to build fences at the top of the cliff, and again, I don't want to be driving ambulances anymore. They're the people that shift the culture. They're the people that shift narrative, and you're part of that journey. And I just want to laud you again for that. And I like the fact that as with us, we want to engage with the cannabis using community, but not the pro actors, the pushers, and the advocates who are just I'm sorry, just nuts. But those who are genuinely, like my brother, who was in that space, and he didn't laud it, he didn't promote it, but he was, this completely ruined his life, and in the end took him. It did take him, and when we present to different policymakers, and we talk about again the realities of the harms, but then the very personal costs, and it's not just about telling sob stories. It is about helping people understand the chaos that is this. And when families are destroyed and people living on their own, doing their own thing on an island, stoners go out and do whatever they want, as much as that's destructive, in the end of the day, they're only destroying their own life. But that's very rare. It's very rare. So just in rounding up, I just want to say to our listeners, look, it's important that you connect with Aubrey's work, Every Brain Matters, and particularly if you're in a situation where a family member is using cannabis specifically. Obviously, other drugs are there, and we have connections, as you know, the audience knows, are aware of our work connections with the recovery sector, and we work closely with the recovery sector. It's not our space. We're advocates and educators, but we do work closely with them. But Aubrey's work as a grassroots advocate, someone who's educated themselves, has really understood this from the inside out, is really important. It's not just to say, lived experience, earned resiliency, important, but she's now take it to a next level. So the expertise that's there is profound, guys. I'm just going to bang the drum here for Aubree's work, because it is profound and it is accessible. And those are mums, dads, brothers, sisters, aunties, uncles who are going, what do I do with this? Please engage with Aubree's platforms. Look at what they're doing. Maybe you can you'll learn a lot from the work that every Brain Matters does. But I encourage you to actually look for solutions, but be part of the solution. Be part of the solution. There's so many people are either part of the problem or they're just sitting on the fence pretending it's not an issue. And we just encourage you to engage, because those voices will make a difference. And of course, with all our resources, they're available online as well. We're not here to promote and bang our drum. But again, we really want to encourage people to build resiliency in their families. Every brain does matter. And to build a resilient brain and a resilient life requires a drug-free culture. And we want to see that develop so our young people have got the chance to move forward. After that little bang on, Aubrey Adams, thank you for joining us on Unnecessary Harm podcast. It's an absolute pleasure. Hope to get you back on another time, and we'll talk about some more of this stuff. But for now, we're going to sign off. And to all our listeners, thanks for joining us again. And until next time, stay safe and be clever. Bye.
Thank you, Shane.
As we wrap up today's session, remember, each step towards understanding is a step away from unnecessary harm. We're here to empower, inspire, and pave the way for optimal well-being. Stay resilient, stay informed, and continue being the change your community needs. Thank you for joining us at the Unnecessary Harm podcast. Until next time, take care and keep pushing forward.